Major Garrett is with us from Capitol Hill. And Major, it is mid-May now. The convention is in July. Did we get any better sense of whether and or when we'll see an endorsement?
From Speaker Ryan for Donald Trump, no, we didn't. But it's obviously evolving and it's going to happen. There's no one I've talked to close to Speaker Ryan or within the general Republican Party establishment on the House or Senate who disbelieves that Ryan's going to endorse Trump. That's going to happen. It's a matter of when and under what conditions, and it's clear that Ryan is comfortable drawing it out for a bit longer. And he's doing that for a couple of reasons. One, to preserve his own political future. In fact, the Trump campaign doesn't succeed, doesn't win the presidency, then Ryan will have preserved some autonomy for himself in this process for 2020 if it is required. The other thing he's trying to do is concentrate Donald Trump's mind on the actual legislative and policy work that House Republicans have been doing under Ryan's leadership. And the last thing that they're trying to iron out, and this was really a lot of what the conversations were today, both on the House side and the Senate side, very, very nuts and bolts political. By that I mean, what does the Trump campaign mean for House Republicans seeking re-election and the Senate Republicans seeking re-election? Because they really want to know what Trump is going to provide on the upside and how he's going to try to minimize the potential downsides. Because for Republicans seeking re-election, that's really the first and foremost litmus test for Trump. Are you going to help me or are you going to hurt me? And if you're going to hurt me, how much distance do I have to have between myself and you to protect me and my own political future? Because everyone in politics, their first obligation is, quite understandably, to themselves, because you can't have a political future if you lose your election or re-election. And so that's a huge part of what's going on in these conversations. And I'm told that Trump did something very helpful for himself. In these conversations, both on the House side and the Senate side, he did something that the lawmakers weren't expecting. He didn't say much. He listened, spent most of his time just taking in information from those who wanted to offer it. Lawmakers love to be listened to. They love to be able to give a floor on which they can talk and express their opinions. They didn't expect that from Trump. Trump did precisely that, so he did himself some favors, at least in that context.
Major, I thought it was notable there was no photo op of Donald Trump and Paul Ryan together. Paul Ryan had his regular weekly news conference where he discussed the meeting, but Trump didn't speak at all after, instead tweeting that he had a, quote, great day in D.C. So what do you make of that?
Well, it was a publicity bonanza for the picking, and Donald Trump decided not to play, which is highly unusual for him. But it's also, I think, consistent with his approach to this. He understands now, or is coming to understand, the prominent Republicans not on the Trump train need to find a way to get there. And he's going to give them the space and time to do that. And the less he talks about that process and the more he allows them to talk about their process, the more room and time he gives them. So I think there is something to be noted here, that this is a slightly more sophisticated approach from Trump, because he doesn't need to speak on his own behalf right now. He is the presumptive Republican nominee. What he does need to do is give Republicans either in the skeptical or semi-hostile camp time and space to make up their own mind and move toward them if they can. And if they can't, then he can speak to that then. But what he's doing now, by not inserting him into all the potential coverage, and I'm sure you saw all the cameras arrayed around the Republican National Committee headquarters, Elaine. There had to be, between the two different stakeout positions, nearly 70 cameras involved and hundreds of reporters. I mean, it was the kind of thing Trump hasn't seen. It was possibly a larger media contingent than when he announced his campaign for the presidency in the first place. And he did not dive in, which is his typical desire and motivation. So I think he's trying to give these lawmakers space and time to work things out on their own, and that is helpful for both sides of this equation.
Major, Lindsey Graham has said some not so nice things about Donald Trump, throughout the primary, but we learned Thursday that they've essentially agreed to a ceasefire. What do we know about that?
Well, that Trump called Lindsey Graham, the senator from South Carolina, yesterday, and they had a 15-minute conversation centered principally on national security. That's Lindsey Graham's expertise. Lindsey Graham described it as productive and cordial. Those are sort of cliches that all politicians use when they don't really mean to say much, but want to say something that sounds polite. So we don't really know how great a conversation it was. I imagine the first 5 minutes were a little on the rough side. They would have to be, one would think. if it was an honest sort of conversation. But it's also an indication that Trump is trying to let bygones be bygones and realizing he may never get Lindsey Graham, but if you can make Lindsey Graham less hostile and less of a critic, that's to the betterment of his move and his efforts to obtain unity for the Republican Party. And I think what Trump sees in all this is, if I can't convince someone to support them, maybe I can convince them to be less critical of me than they otherwise had been or were inclined to be. And that's also an evolution in his thinking on this, and we'll see how effectively it plays out.
Fascinating to watch the diplomatic efforts going on there in Washington. All right, Major Garrett on Capitol Hill. Major, thanks so much.
Sure.